Well, one nice thing about doing power rankings at night is I don't have to worry about glare from the window. So there's that. So I recorded this 8 hours ago. 8.5, almost 9. And then the file corrupted right as I hit number 1. You'd think maybe Shannon would swear, scream, or throw things. Nah. I just said, all right. Okay. And that's the end of that. Because I had to watch the World Juniors today, and I had to watch 2 different games, and I had to do videos in between on the Hockey Channel, so here we are. And it's too bad because I had a lot of fun putting that video together. I think you guys would have enjoyed that video, but here we are. And in the meantime, some of the data on the board may have rubbed off. Hopefully not a lot. I don't think a lot has come off. I'm trying to think if there's anything else down here. I don't think so. I think we're good. So number 32 on the board is the Jaguars. And I got to admit that when the Jaguars are number 32, I will think of the good place. And I've got Titans and Chargers. And I know it's mixed teams, but I don't have a Titans hat. I've looked at NFL hats, and they're not cheap usually. So I kind of have to look at, okay, so how much does the channel generate in views and money, and how much am I spending on the stuff that I'm wearing for the videos? And so NFL is kind of waiting for stuff to be on sale. So I apologize for the mix. Now getting back to Jacksonville, they get destroyed 41-17 by the Chicago Bears. And now this week they're going to be in against Indianapolis. So they can have a control over the playoff picture because Houston, who's number 31, they have a say in it as well. Now, for Houston, they lost 37-31 against Cincinnati in a game between 2 teams that don't have a defense. And so now this week, Houston, they're going to be playing against Tennessee, against these guys. So the 31 and 32 teams will decide who wins that division and may very well eliminate one of these teams from the playoffs. Now, if you listen to J.J. Watt in his interview regarding the fans and how he feels about the fans and being 4-11, I should say. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Houston comes out with a better game. Houston, clearly, there's a chip on their shoulder, and we'll see whether or not it works. It's worked for the Bengals. That chip on the shoulder has definitely worked for the Bengals over the last couple of weeks. Now, having these 2 and 32 and 31 means number 30 is the Jets. The Jets won over Cleveland. Now, there is an asterisk there because Cleveland was missing their receivers. The whole COVID protocol thing has wreaked havoc with certain teams at different times in this schedule. And this week it was Cleveland, and the Jets said thanks. And so did Jacksonville, because now they have the number 1 draft pick. Yeah, even if Jacksonville wins and the Jets lose this week, Jacksonville gets the number 1 draft pick. So for the Jets, now they don't really have anything to worry about. They're going to be in against New England. So the whole, they're trying to go on 16, they're trying to sabotage their season. Well, if that was the case, they've failed. They're 2 and 13. They can't even win at losing. Maybe they'll put that on a pennant, on a banner somewhere. Welcome to the home of the New York Jets. We can't even win at losing. There you go. Maybe the most Jets thing of all, right? So they're number 30, and they could move up to 29 if they win this week against New England. And for Detroit, who got destroyed by Tampa 47-7, and now for Detroit, they're at home against Minnesota in a game that doesn't really mean anything. Well, if the Jets go in and say they beat New England, and Detroit gets whooped again, I might be justified in putting them up to 29th. The problem is, this is the last week of power rankings. I know, I'm sorry. But to me, after the season's done, it's done. So, if I was going to do another power rankings, it's possible that spot would be on the line. But next week, I will be looking at previews for the playoffs. So next week, instead of doing the power rankings, we'll be previewing the playoffs, and we'll know exactly who's in and who's out. And none of these teams in the bottom 4 are in. Neither is this one, Cincinnati, but Cincinnati's win over Houston. And now for the Bengals, their game this week, they're home against Baltimore, so they're going to lose that one. They're going to end up being 4-11-1. It's not a great record, but you know what? Honestly, the Bengals, I think they'll trend in the right direction as long as Burrow comes back and they stop getting him murdered. That's an important thing. Stop getting your quarterback murdered. If you can do that, you have a good chance. But for the Bengals, we'll see how things go for them next year. I am slightly encouraged by the uptick in their play over the last couple of weeks. It's nice to see some pride on the line. I know for fans who want to get that number 1 draft pick, you're like, you're winning now. but it is kind of nice to see pride make a difference for these players. Number 27, Philadelphia. Now here's the interesting thing with Philly. They lose against Dallas 37-17. And now for Philadelphia, who are eliminated, they have to play spoiler this week at home against Washington. And they can really spoil the party for Washington. But for Philadelphia, the interesting thing to me is, so they fall to 4-11-1, they're out. But when they were up, I think it was 14-3, and hearing the announcers watching the highlights, like, yep, it's been completely different with Jalen Hurts in there. And I'm thinking, not really. Last week, like the week before this one, wasn't that much different. They were 4-10-1 coming this week. I like Hurts. I think Hurts has been an upgrade over Wentz, certainly. But let's not just, make it sound like it's been a 180, because Philadelphia still has major problems. This is a team that still has major problems, as does New York. So for the Giants, they lost to Baltimore 27-13. That wasn't a close game. I have them ahead of Philadelphia because Philadelphia loses to Dallas, and the Giants, well, they are 5-10. They're ahead of... This is so sad. They're still mathematically alive for the playoffs. Yeah, and for the Giants, they're at home against Dallas. So if they beat Dallas, they're still mathematically alive, and there's still the possibility that the New York Giants could win their division, because that's how the NFC East works. Heck, the Jets could end up winning this division if they got moved into it. And number 25, sticking with the NFC East, is Dallas. They beat Philadelphia 37-17. Fine, they're up here. They're 6-9. And now for Dallas this week, they're in against the New York Giants. So this game could decide things. If Dallas can beat New York, and they can, I'm not saying they will, because earlier this season, well, Dallas should win, but they didn't. So because they didn't, we're in this situation, and they're NFC East, so nobody does. But in deciding who's going to get killed by probably Tom Brady in the wild card game, Dallas may have an edge. It's possible. We're just there, where a team that's 7-9 could win a division and end up against a team that's 11-5 and have home field advantage. I would say because it's 2020, but it's not the first time that's happened, that a team with a poor record has hosted a team with a much better record in a playoff game. So that's your bottom row. These teams should not be in the running for a playoff spot. 5-10, 6-9, and yet they are. Number 24, Denver. Not a lot for Denver to play for. This week they lost against the LA Chargers, 19-16. So yeah, they're playing out the string. And now for Denver, they are at home against Vegas. So that's a game that doesn't mean anything between these two teams. It's just playing for pride. We'll see how Denver does this week. It's one of the reasons why I'm not going to do a power rankings next week, because a lot of these games don't necessarily mean a whole lot. I don't want to put a whole lot into them. But yeah, so for Denver, losing against the Chargers means the Chargers move up to 23. 6-9. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I would be fine with a 6-10 season for the LA Chargers. For the Chargers, they are finishing out their season in Kansas City. So 6-10 it is. Now, there's a possibility that Kansas City rests a bunch of starters, and maybe the Chargers stay in this. Maybe you end up with Kansas City being 14-2. But I don't know if with backups I would take the Chargers over Kansas City. That being said, Kansas City didn't win by a lot this week. Kansas City's had some kind of shaky wins lately, so maybe. And if the Chargers ended up 7-9, I would be angry with them, because that would give me optimism, and that always hurts when you're a Chargers fan. This always hurts when you feel optimistic, because the optimism always results in heartbreak and you flinging Mr. Hat across the room. And the Hat doesn't necessarily like it. Number 22, Washington. What a disastrous week for Washington. They lose against Carolina. All of a sudden, they're right back in the pit. A few weeks ago, we were talking about how good they were, and they were up to 18th on the power rankings, and it looked like they might end up with at least a 500 record, and things were getting better. Well, this week, they're still in control of their own destiny. This week for Washington, they're in Philadelphia. They win that game. They win the division. They end up 7-9, but not a happy 7-9. When you're releasing a quarterback that you drafted a year and a half ago with the idea that this was going to be the future of your team, it's a bad look. I'm not saying they made the wrong decision in drafting and producing and all this, but maybe the drafting part was wrong. Because when you're releasing him later, and not much later, and he fell in the draft in the first place because teams were worried about his maturity level, that's why teams pay attention to that kind of thing. And I know people say, well, why'd this guy drop? He's great. And we say, well, apparently he's got some locker room issues. And you'll hear people say, it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean anything. It does, though. And so for Washington, they're down to 22nd, and yet they're leading a division. They're nowhere near the top 2 rows. Weird. Number 21, the team that beat them, Carolina. And again, it's because Carolina beats Washington, so I say, all right, I'll put Carolina ahead of Washington. For Carolina, they're nowhere near a playoff spot. This week, they're at home against New Orleans. I'll go out on a limb and say they probably lose to New Orleans because New Orleans still has something to play for. We will get to the teams that have something to play for that are not the NFC East pretty darn soon. But yeah, so Carolina 21st. Number 20, I have Atlanta. Now for Atlanta, they barely lose to Jacksonville. They barely lose. Yeah, Bortles. We'll get to Bortles in a second. Legit Bortles. They lose 17-14 against Kansas City. And for Atlanta this week, they're in Tampa Bay. They likely lose that game, but at least they were close. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, I'll put them at 20th because why not? But really, in this area, whatever. This is the whatever part of the board. I know last year I talked about, hey, could I just drop the bottom 2 rows and just talk about the top 2 rows? You were like, no, you grade all 32. All right, sure. All right, cool beans. Got it. Cool. Number 19. Minnesota, team that's 6-9. You'll be playing Detroit in a game that Vikings and Lions fans might be watching, although Lions fans without Stafford won't be watching much. Likely a pretty humiliating season for Detroit. And they weren't expected to be great, but it's been a rough year. And for Minnesota, rough year too. They were getting respectable. They were getting back in the mix. And then it fell apart again. So for Minnesota, they lost 52-33 against New Orleans, and whatever hope they might have had left was crushed a long time ago, it would seem. At least a couple of weeks ago. So they're playing out the string. I would expect them to probably beat Detroit, end up 7-9, and then we have the conversation about, so what are the Minnesota Vikings and what kind of moves need to be made to fix it. Number 18, also in that category, is San Francisco. They won this week. So for San Francisco, just looking for the score here, beating Arizona 20-12. And now this week they're playing at home against Seattle. It's a game that doesn't mean anything to Seattle. Seattle's won the division, but I think this game means a little bit to San Francisco. You want to go out on a high note. You've beaten the Arizona Cardinals, and now you're going to want to beat Seattle just to show your fan base, hey, things are going to get better next year. We're going to get guys back. We're going to figure this out. San Francisco, very good team last year. This is just a down year. It's just the way it is. I would expect them to bounce back next year. So these last couple of weeks may not mean a lot in general, but to that team it may very well. Number 17, New England. So they finish outside the top 2 rows. It happened. New England is not one of the top 2 row teams. And coming out of that 38-9 drubbing they take from Buffalo, yes, the argument can be, is it time? Yeah, it's time to do a rebuild. The one thing, too, with them is that, I think bringing in Cam Newton, they might have thought, okay, maybe we can reclaim Cam Newton. We got Belichick, and Newton might be able to get back to where he was, and he can't. He's not Cam Newton from the past anymore. Now, New England, they're at home against the New York Jets. I expect that, again, for the sake of just that whole self-respect thing, they probably win that game against the Jets. Notice I'm saying probably. 16, Las Vegas. So the Raiders, I would expect the Raiders, who this week are in Denver, I think the Raiders probably win that game, end up 500, and then we have that discussion again about, so the Raiders, good and bad. And I really think, and I've said this in regards to other sports too, being in the middle might be the worst. Being in this mushy middle where you're good, you're not great, you've got some holes, but there's some reason to think things might turn around. I think that's worse in some cases than just being really bad. That being said, how long have the Jets been bad? When was the last time the Lions were really good? The Bengals have been bad for a while. I know I'm a Bengals fan. Houston, Jacksonville. You may not want to necessarily go full Jacksonville, but again, when you've got a team that's in the middle, what do you do? I think it's kind of more difficult because the idea of just toss it all out and start over. It's more difficult in football, I think, than in other sports because it can be really, really tough to pull yourself out of that bottom row. But yeah, we'll see how the Raiders do. 15, Cardinals. Now the Cardinals are 8-7. They're still in this. So the Cardinals coming out of that 20-12 loss against San Francisco, which hurts. Now for Arizona, they're in against the Rams. The good news for them is the Rams haven't looked very good lately. The Rams have looked kind of pedestrian. And the Rams, take another hit. We'll see what happens with the Rams. We'll get to the Rams, but for them, they're going in against the Rams, who are 9-7. The only problem is they don't have control over their destiny. If Chicago wins, Chicago's 9-7. Chicago has the tiebreaker on them. So Chicago, I now have at 14. Keep in mind, it's not that long ago. Chicago was all the way down like 21st, 22nd. I think is the lowest I had them this year. Now for Chicago, they beat Jacksonville, so they avoided the dreaded trap game, which with Jacksonville, it's a really weak trap. It's like it's a mouse trap, and you're driving a Hummer, so probably not going to get stopped by that trap. But for Chicago this week, they're at home against Green Bay. Games within that division are usually pretty close. If they can beat Green Bay, make the playoffs, this year is a win for Chicago. And Trubisky, right? Like, where does that come from? Like, this offense that Chicago suddenly found, their Achilles heel over the years, and I'm talking like decades, and suddenly they're scoring 30 points a game like it's no big deal. We'll see how that works for them against Green Bay. Green Bay coming off of a huge win this week, and we'll see whether or not Chicago's able to break through and get themselves a victory that they desperately need, because I think playoffs would be huge for them. Number 13 is the Rams. And the Rams I toyed with dropping down all the way to 14 because I can't drop them below Arizona. But for the Rams, they're 9-6 now. So it's getting a little more perilous. That loss that they had against the Seattle Seahawks 20-9, it showed that A, they're struggling to score, and B, Seattle is getting better defensively. And now, Bortles is being re-signed by the Rams. So yeah, as somebody who used to cheer for the Rams regularly back when Jim Everett was the quarterback, remember, Chris, bet you won't say it again, Chris, and then stupid. But anyways, yeah, as somebody who's cheered for the Rams, it's hard when you see that quarterback position take a little bit of a nosedive, and Goff's out, so they're going to sign Bortles. Oh no, the good place will haunt me for the rest of my life. But yeah, so we'll see how things work out for the Rams, if they're able to get the running game going, and if they're able to get themselves into a playoff spot and maybe get themselves a better matchup. Number 12, Baltimore. Baltimore with the convincing 27-13 win over the Giants, which was never really in any kind of doubt. And now for Baltimore, yeah, they're in Cincinnati, so that should be a win for them. So Baltimore now is at 10-5. They're above the playoff line. They win. They're 11-5 to make the playoffs. This is just a win and you're in. Just very, very simple. Win and you're in, and it's done. And all of a sudden, it's Cleveland that looks like maybe they're in trouble. And if Cleveland ends up with 10 wins and missing the playoffs, that might be the most Browns thing that we've seen. And I apologize to Browns fans everywhere, because that would be painful. And there's no guarantee the Browns are going to win this week. None. Number 11. Miami. Miami's won over a lot of people this year. 26-25 win over Vegas. What's with this switching quarterbacks thing, though? It's weird, isn't it? The Fitzpatrick goes in and they're like, oh, no, Tua's fine. They're putting Fitzpatrick because why? So, yeah, Miami, if he's the better quarterback, just play him the whole game. Now, for Miami, they're going to be playing against Buffalo, and we'll see. We'll see whether or not they switch quarterbacks during the game or maybe between different... I mean, and Tua and Fitzpatrick seem to have a decent relationship. They high-five each other after each play, but it's bizarre. I'm trying to think of another time where you've seen two quarterbacks sharing the job during the game. And, I mean, you've got the Niners on the board here. What would it have been like if they'd had Montana for 2 or 3 plays, 2 or 3 drives, and then all of a sudden Steve Young's on the field? Would have given the team a completely different look, where you have Young out there running the ball, and Montana is one of the most accurate throwers in the history of the game. I don't know. Maybe the Niners missed out. Maybe the Dolphins are starting something that other teams will try, where you have 2 quarterbacks that are going to play in the game, and who's starting really isn't all that important. We'll see. It'll be interesting. Number 10, Cleveland. Cleveland, without all their receivers, they lose against the Jets. I had to bump them down. You have to bump down a team that loses to the Jets. And I do this despite understanding that if they'd had all their receivers in, odds are they probably win the game. But again, Cleveland's 10-5, and if they lose this week and they're at home against Pittsburgh, Twitter. Twitter's going to be fun this week. Because Pittsburgh and Cleveland fans hate each other. It's a flat-out, complete and total hatred. I don't understand it. I don't. Because I'll be honest, Cleveland has been irrelevant for so long before this season. I'm really surprised that that level of vitriol exists between Pittsburgh and Cleveland fans, but it's there. It's entertaining, and I enjoy it, and I'm glad Cleveland is good this year. But yeah, I'm just kind of surprised. So we'll see if Cleveland gets enough guys back this week, and if they can put up a fight against Pittsburgh. But that's the game that I would definitely be watching. That's the game of the week right there. Number 9, Tennessee. I went back and forth on where to put Tennessee. So they lose 40-14 against Green Bay. They get annihilated there. For Tennessee, of course, they're in against Houston this week. They're 10-5. They do have the lead in the division. They do. Over Indianapolis. Now, Indianapolis, they're 10-5. They're below the playoff line. So having Tennessee below Indianapolis, I understand Tennessee fans aren't going to be happy. But for Indianapolis, they lost 28-24 to Pittsburgh. They had that lead and they blew it. That was a close game. Tennessee's was not. So, again, it's kind of a flip of the coin. I threw Indianapolis in at number 8, Tennessee at number 9. If you want to say they're both number 8, go for it. And again, Indianapolis, they end the season against Jacksonville, so that's not going to tell us whether or not they're any good. But the good news is that if Indianapolis and Tennessee both win, odds are one of these other teams ahead loses, probably loses, and we see one of them out of the playoffs. The AFC is going to have a very good team miss the playoffs. It's going to happen because we've already got all these teams at 10 wins, and we could have them all at 11 by the end of this coming weekend. It's possible. Number 7. We've gone back and forth on the Steelers, but I would say that that comeback win over the Colts is huge. Now they're against Cleveland. So for the Steelers, there you go. They're now 12-3. And if you want to say weakest 12-3 team ever, I'm not going to have an argument with you. And if the playoffs started right now, they'd be against Baltimore. I like Baltimore's chances against Pittsburgh in a one-game winner-take-all. I like that playoff game. I think Baltimore would be a pretty good matchup for Pittsburgh. So we'll see what happens in that one. Number 6, Seattle. Seattle, of course, their defense now coming into sharp focus and doing well. So for Seattle, they win, and basically at this stage, the game against San Francisco doesn't mean anything. They're 11-4. I mean, I guess seeding might matter. They might look at this and say we'd rather be the number 2 seed than the number 3. But I don't know how concerned they are with that. They're in the playoffs. They've clinched the division, so we'll see what else they do from here. But Seattle, at times this year, we're touch and go, but they're still in the top row. Every year, Seattle's a pretty good team. And then playoffs roll around, and that can change. Number 5, New Orleans. Now, New Orleans whooped Minnesota 52-33. New Orleans is going into Carolina. New Orleans, 11-4, and they're the number 2 seed in the NFC. And we'll see how they wrap up their season. But New Orleans looks good. I don't know that I want to play them right out of the gate. Right now, they'd be matched up with Chicago. I think they would take Chicago. But again, next week I'll do previews, and we'll get into who's good against who and what may very well happen. So yeah, New Orleans number 5, and I was kind of torn on whether or not to have them 5 because I have Tampa Bay at number 4. So New Orleans gets the destruction win here. Tampa Bay gets the destruction win here. Tampa Bay's 10-5. New Orleans is 11-4. And for Tampa Bay, they are at home against Atlanta. So they should win that one. So not a whole lot's going to change. Tampa Bay again at 10-5. I think they've looked great the last couple of weeks. I think they've looked fantastic. And yeah, they're going to be really dangerous playoff time. Especially when you look at it and they be against Washington if the playoffs started tomorrow. I don't think Washington would give them any trouble. And then you're the number 5 seed, and then they could be playing Green Bay in the next round. So if it's Green Bay and Tampa Bay, if it's a battle of the Bays, that again, there's some fascinating matchups we could see in the playoffs along the way, and I'm here for it. Number 3, Green Bay. So there you go. NFC. And Green Bay, with their win over Tennessee, I think showed that I can legit leave them at the number 3 spot. Absolutely legit leave them in the number 3 spot. They're in Chicago this week. I would anticipate them beating Chicago. They're 12-3. They go to 13-3. Yeah, they're a Super Bowl contender. Aaron Rodgers. Discussion of whether or not he might be MVP. The argument can be made for him. There are others as well. I still think Mahomes probably gets it, but there's that Josh Allen kid that's turned out to be pretty good. So yeah, Green Bay at number 3. So then the question becomes, okay, what's Shannon going to do with number 2 and number 1? Here's what I'm going to do. Number 2, number 1. Allow me to explain. Kansas City, they win 17-14 against Atlanta. I'm not that impressed with some of these wins for Kansas City. They're getting them. I get it. But it's reminding me of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh at 12-3. We can agree that some of those wins, not great. Some of the wins for Kansas City, not great. You look at Buffalo and what they've done over the second half of the season. You look at that 38-9 drubbing that they laid on the New England Patriots. To me, right now, the Buffalo Bills are playing the best football in the National Football League. So yes, Kansas City's 14-1. They've been great. Buffalo's 12-3, also great. To me, Buffalo is the best team in the league. Now, not a whole lot's going to get settled this week. Buffalo, they're against Miami, and for Kansas City, they're against the Chargers. Kansas City, would I be surprised to see them beat the Chargers? No, I'd be more surprised if the Chargers beat them. Would I be surprised if Miami, with more to fight for than Buffalo, if Miami comes up with a great game and beats Buffalo? Not really. Would it affect how I have them in the standings? Probably not. I really think that right now, Buffalo has kind of shown that maybe they're the team to beat. This might be the best chance they've had since the early 90s, maybe late 80s. Remember, if that Lee Norwood kick is good, we're not talking about the Bills as never having won a Super Bowl. And that's the saddest part of all of it is we would be talking about how they won 1 out of all their trips, but not 0. So this may very well be that Bills team. And I know people are saying they haven't won a playoff game yet. Yeah, I'm aware. But this is a team that has just looked really, really good. And it is an exciting time right now if you're a Buffalo fan. So there you go. Because I know there's been people who've said Shannon doesn't like Buffalo. That's why Buffalo Sabres are always low in the power rankings. I'm giving Buffalo their due in football. I think they've been absolutely fantastic this year. And there's a part of me saying, you know what? If you asked me, if you said, so who would you like to see in the Super Bowl right now? Tom Brady against the Bills. And then the Bills win it. That would be absolutely amazing. That would be a fantastic Super Bowl to see. Or Drew Brees against them or Aaron Rodgers against them. It's basically them. Kansas City, yes, they could win 2 straight Super Bowls. They've got the 14-1 record, likely to go 15-1, and they could run the table through the playoffs. But outside of that, other teams in the AFC, I don't know. I'm partial to the Bills. I've got to say, I would really like to see the Bills do something so we finally get rid of that narrative. The Buffalo doesn't win championships, and the Bills can't win a playoff game. Be nice to see those two things change. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Thank you guys so much for following along with another season of Power Rankings in the National Football League. And like I said, next week we start talking about playoffs. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. I will talk to you again soon.